Have you ever wanted to play a frontline tank who secretly acts as an edgelord while also nailing every social check that your game master asks you to make? If the answer to any of these questions is yes, then you're going to want to watch this video because you are probably a Dark Knight in the Final Fantasy XIV tabletop RPG. My name is Coleman Webb. I'm the creator of LimitBreak20.com, where we have all the digital resources you need to play the Final Fantasy XIV tabletop RPG at your table or online. So let's go ahead and dive into it. So you might be asking yourself, what is Dark Knight? A Dark Knight is one of the 3 tanking classes in the Final Fantasy XIV tabletop RPG. Now, what makes this tabletop system unique is that tanking classes have this ability to inflict something called enmity, which is a -5 penalty for any enemy to target another creature other than the tank. Dark Knights are driven to seek justice at all costs. And I think that there's really 2 reasons why you'd want to play a Dark Knight. The first is that they are the most versatile tanking class in the Final Fantasy XIV tabletop RPG. They're the only class that uses 2 different status effects to make attack rolls. They use the Strength status effect, which is to swing their sword, and they also use the Mind status effect. And both of those have a +4 to hit. So what's really nice about that is that enemies in the Final Fantasy XIV tabletop RPG have a physical defense and they have a magical defense. A lot of times there's going to be one that is much lower than the other. The Dark Knight is really the most adaptable of all the tanks because they can attack with their physical or magical defense. The second reason you'd want to play a Dark Knight is due to the fact that they have a very high mind statistic. In Final Fantasy XIV tabletop RPG, there is no charisma checks, so any social check you make is more than likely going to be used with an intelligence check or a mind check. And because you're going to have a +4 to mind, it's going to make it so you can really play out those social interactions in a much more positive way than any other tank could. Getting a +4 to these checks is going to be much different than getting a +2 or maybe even a +1, which is what the other 2 tanks have. So now let's talk about some of the defining traits that the Dark Knight has. The first is going to be Great Weapon Master. I'm just kidding. It's actually called Dark Side, but it works very similar to Great Weapon Master. Dark Side is an enchantment that the Dark Knight has. What's really unique about this is that if you get score a direct hit on a single target, you are rolling an additional d6 worth of damage. What Dark Side allows you to do is spend 2 MP to make it so that if you roll a 1, 2, or 3, then your dice roll is going to be 0. But if you roll a 4, 5, or 6, it's a flat 10 damage. Now, a lot of times you might be asking yourself, when should I be using Dark Side? And the answer is every single time. Just from a math perspective, the average damage you inflict on a d6 is 3.5. And if you have a 0 or 10 outcome, the average damage that you're going to inflict is 5. So if you have Dark Side up and you can make a single target attack, the answer is going to be always. And it's a really, really cool mechanic. And for those of us that played the 2014 edition of Dungeons & Dragons, having Great Weapon Master was a really awesome feature, and I know it kind of got nerfed in the 2024 Player's Handbook. So it is effectively back here in the Final Fantasy XIV tabletop RPG. So you're welcome, and thank you, Square Enix. So the first primary ability we're going to go over is the Dark Knight combo, Hard Slash and Siphon Strike. This targets a single enemy that is adjacent to the Dark Knight. And what's unique about this is this has a base effect of 2 damage. Now in Final Fantasy XIV tabletop RPG, a base effect is going to be something that just happens no matter what. So with this ability, you'll see that what it does is not only does it give 2 damage, but it inflicts enmity, which is that -5 penalty to hit on any other creature. And it's also going to recover 1 MP. In addition, it's going to activate a combo into Souleater. Now, what happens is if you make an attack check, so your d20 plus your strength modifier, and you actually meet or exceed the enemy's physical defense, you score what's called a direct hit, and you're going to be rolling an additional 1d6 worth of damage. The follow-up combo attack is called Souleater. And what this is going to be is another single target attack. And what's really nice about the combo abilities is if you are to, let's say you make a direct hit and you roll and you kill the enemy creature with your first attack, you can actually move and target a second creature with Souleater. So this is going to be, again, another single target attack. You're going to be making a strength check, d20 plus 4, against the physical defense. And what's nice is that this is also going to have a base effect of 2, but it's also going to restore 2 HP, as well as inflict enmity. So you could even use a primary attack on one creature and then target another one, and now both of those creatures have enmity on you and have a -5 penalty. Again, if you meet or exceed the physical defense with your attack check, you're going to be getting a direct hit, so that's another 1d6 worth of damage. The next two primary abilities are going to be using the mind stat to make attack checks. So the first one is called Unleash. And what this is an area of effect that is a 5x5 square that is centered directly on the Dark Knight. And what's going to happen is its base effect is that it's going to just inflict enmity on anyone caught in that square, which is pretty awesome. Now, if you do make your attack check with mind and you do score a direct hit, that's going to be doing 2 damage to any enemy that gets that direct hit. So what you want to use this one for is going to be if there are 3 or 4 or more enemies that are kind of clustered together, you want to jump right in there and hit them with Unleash right from the rip, because now all those creatures are going to have that -5 penalty. The final primary ability they have is called Unmend. And with this ability, it actually has a range of 5 squares, and you're still making an attack check with your mind, so a d20 plus 4. Now what's really nice about this is its base effect is it's going to be doing 3 damage and inflicting enmity on the target. So if someone's not within range, you can cast Unmend and you're going to be able to get them set up with enmity. And if you score a direct hit, you're going to be doing an additional 1d6 worth of damage. So let's dive into their secondary abilities. The first one that we're going to talk about is called Rampart. And what this does is this makes it so the damage you take by abilities is reduced by 2 until the start of your next turn. So basically, any enemy that attacks you until your next turn, -2 to every hit you take. And you can use this once per phase. Now, phases in Final Fantasy XIV tabletop RPG are sort of like narrative shifts in combat. So think of it as the goblins call for reinforcements, or the boss takes half health and they hit a second mode where they get a shield and they're doing more damage. It allows you to actually use your resources and abilities more often than you generally would in a fight. So if something does have a resets on a phase, definitely use it. It's not this precious resource that's going to be lost forever. There is no point in hoarding these. The next secondary ability we're going to be talking about is called Low Blow. And what this does is this has a range of 1 square, so basically an enemy that's adjacent to you. And when you use this inflicts the stun ailment on, or enfeeblement on, the target. And what stun does is it makes it so the next attack you have, you basically get an advantage dice. But more importantly, if an enemy puts an area of effect marker, so think of it as like an area of effect attack, that's going to trigger. If you use Low Blow, you stun the target, removing that area of effect. So not something you want to just use like right off the gate, but use it a little more tactically, or if you feel like you need to get advantage on your next attack. The final secondary ability we're going to talk about is Flood of Darkness. Now this is a magical attack that costs 2 MP to trigger for the Dark Knight. Now what's nice about this is that this is going to just impact a 3x3 space that is adjacent to the Dark Knight. And what it's going to do is it's going to be doing 2 damage as a base effect to all targets in the area, and it activates Dark Side. So if you use Flood of Darkness, you're going to be able to trigger your ability to roll your d6 on a direct hit to try and get that flat 10 damage. Now let's dive into the instant abilities of the Dark Knight. Instant abilities are like reactions in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. The nice thing about instant abilities is that you don't just get 1 per round. The rule is that you can use them once on any character's turn, whether it's your own, an ally's, or an enemy's, as long as the trigger conditions are met. So let's dive into these. The first ability we're going to talk about is Provoke. Now the trigger for this is when any enemy begins their turn, it has a range of 10 squares, and its base effect is that it inflicts enmity on that target. So let's say you are in that area of effect and you cast Unleash, and what you end up doing is getting 4 enemies, but there's 2 that are getting ready to attack the white mage. You could use Provoke when one of those creatures starts their turn, and that's going to make it so they have a -5 penalty to hit, and you can only use this once per phase. The next instant ability we're going to talk about is Interject, and the trigger for this is an enemy that is going to be using a invoked ability or an invoked ability to generate a marker. The range is 1 square, so that creature has to be adjacent to the Dark Knight. And what it does is it allows you to negate that ability completely. So let's say the enemy is a black mage that's getting ready to cast fire on one of your allies. You can just use this to negate that invoked ability. Or let's just say it's a big AoE that's going to be targeting a 5x5 area and you're in it. You can use Interject to just completely remove that marker. And you can only use this once per phase. So the final instant ability we have for the Dark Knight is called Reprisal. And this kind of has some funny wording, but it basically says that any enemy that is using an ability before it's resolved, that's within 2 squares of the Dark Knight. And the range is a 5x5 area that's centered on the Dark Knight. Now, what that basically means is that if there's an enemy that's within 2 squares that triggers this, and then there are other enemies in that 5x5 area, what happens is those enemies, their abilities, all of them, have basically a -2 reduction to the damage until the end of the round. And the limitation on this is once per phase. The Dark Knight's limit break is called Dark Force, and the trigger for this is before any ability that does damage or a marker or an enfeeblement that's going to hit any party members is resolved. It is a single target, and there is sort of an unlimited range on it, so it's not just within an arm's reach or 5 spaces. And basically the effect is that it prevents all damage and the effects of enfeeblements that the ability would have triggered. It basically negates all of that completely. So if there is a situation where the party can't move and they're going to be hit with this massive attack, if the Dark Knight has a limit break, it can negate that attack completely. And that wraps it up for the level 30 Dark Knight guide. Now, when it comes to the 3 different tank classes in the Final Fantasy XIV tabletop RPG, the Dark Knight is definitely the most unique. The fact that they are very versatile and can use strength or mind to sort of use whatever tool they need to in the toolbox for whatever the encounter is thrown at them. In addition, having that additional role play is very, very valuable. One of the hard things about tabletop RPGs and playing martials in particular is the fact that you don't necessarily get great roleplay mechanics unless you're a paladin, right? Now, with that being said, I really like the fact that you have the ability to be the face of the party, you have the party to be versatile, and it really makes this tank class stick out more than any of its other counterparts. And so with that, hope you liked this video. As you can see on the screen, I've been using a character sheet from our website, limitbreak20.com. Feel free to head there if you want to support this channel and really just get a ton of digital assets that you can use to play your character. We've got pre-filled character sheets, we've got fates, we've got scenarios, we even have a monster manual that we update monthly, so check it out, and in the comments below, let me know your experience playing the Dark Knight. Until then, stay safe, adventurers.